Welcome to the session on promoting liberal values and democracy and discourse on the internet. To kick this session off, I would very pleased to welcome Vera Jourova, the European Vice President for Values and Transparency, formerly the Commissioner for Justice and Consumers. So Vice President, welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
We have 15 minutes to seek your wisdom, so perhaps we'll get started straight away. And I'm very pleased that technology is working well. I'm in Sydney and you're in Brussels, and this is a global summit, so that's good. In these sorts of summits, it's often quite common for the conversation to be about the recent past or the near future. But I wonder if I might ask you, thinking about human rights and values for Europe, what do you think the challenges will be for the next decade, for the next 10 years?
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. Hello again. I think that it won't be easy 10 years because the first thing is to make the people or make the values and human rights a reality for the people. We sometimes have a tendency to speak about the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which is a fantastic piece of work which guarantees fundamental rights. But I would rather like to speak about the rights themselves. And this is what we have to do, to explain the society that there are rights which can be enforced, which should be enforced in case of some injustice and some gaps. And I think that in the next 10 years, we will be facing two challenges. First, the post-COVID time. I'm sure that the consequences of COVID in our society will live longer than the virus. And we already now see that the pandemic widened the inequality gap and put fundamental rights to the test. And the second thing is digitalization, the transition. It is quicker than we expected. We wanted to digitalize the society in Europe. We even wanted to, I sometimes say, digitalize democracy and democratize digital. And we wanted to have more time for that. But you see that now everything is getting very, very rapid tempo, and so these are two challenges which we will have to not to adapt to, but to be able to face them. And speaking about the technologies, I think that I'm sure that new technologies should not mean new values. We have the values here. We have the rights. Our predecessors were fighting over centuries, a lot of sacrifices, and we have the values which we have to protect even in the technological era. And we, as you know, we are good at regulating in European Union. We regulated first the data protection. Now the world is watching how it works. And thus we want to continue and to react on the digital technologies and the revolution, where we see that the money is pushing it and that the technologies are emerging, that we have to react by meaningful rules. And we want to do it our European way. And our European way is mainly to guarantee that the values and human rights will be present, will be guaranteed. So our European approach for the Europe's digital society include several principles: universal access to internet services, accessible and human-centric digital public services and administration, ethical principles for human-centric algorithms, and protecting and empowering children in online space. These are 4 principles out of the broader list, but these are the main features. And still, I think that in the next 10 years, we will see a lot of fear and uncertainty in our society. we have to try to understand better why many people in Europe are turning to populism, extremism, exclusion, and hatred, and to stop this trend. And by doing so, we should not be lecturing the people or being ignorant or being ridiculing. It means that we have to open up any possibility to communicate with the people, with the general public, with those who are not with us in our bubble. I really feel bubbled in, especially with this method of work. High time we start to meet again, because we really have to again try to increase the trust of people in democracy. And this, I don't know any better way or any other way than communicate, explain, being accountable, and listen to what the people fear of and what the people would like to gain.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. You talked about the democratization of technology and vice versa. Obviously, there's been a lot of optimism about what the technology could mean for democracy, but clearly also disinformation and manipulation has become a dark force in this space. You've just released further guidance around the issue of disinformation. How do you see that as helping to make a more transparent environment?
Yeah, indeed. By this plan to fight against disinformation, which we presented yesterday, which is in fact the guidance for the platforms and advertising industry to do their job. Yeah, we are not regulating. We are advising. We are demanding maybe the work that should be done by the industry. We want to make the digital world more transparent, accountable, and safe. And there are obligations for the digital industry, and we also have an offer for the people, for the citizens, or advice to be more mindful of what's happening to them, to be more critical about what they read, to be more the masters of internet rather than passive audience. And this is all in our plan. And when I speak about the masters of internet, I speak about the individual citizens who should survive, not being replaced by easy to manipulate crowd. It's a big difference.
It's a big difference.
So what we are proposing is no censorship. We want more fact-checking, more activity from the people to flag the harmful content if they see something which should be fact-checked. I don't speak about illegal content, because illegal content is clear, it should be removed. And we already adopted legislation to push the platforms to do that. But disinformation, it's not illegal content, it's harmful content. That's why I always say for this work, I have to take gloves. I have to be very careful not to demolish the freedom of speech in Europe. Yeah, so no censorship, nobody will be the arbiter of the truth. I will not become the commissioner of the truth. There will be no minister to become the minister of the truth, neither us nor the managers of the platforms. It has to be decentralized. It has to be the work of thousands of fact checkers, of the people who will announce the harmful content, who will seek for answer from the platforms what has been done with their flagged announcement. And this is a complex of things which have to be done by many different actors. And so no top down measure against the disinformation.
Yeah, that's very good. I wonder if I can pick you up on one of those points you made. Talk about people being masters of the internet, and I can see this sort of drawing a line on the previous work you did with GDPR. But individual identity and empowerment's been a part of that European battle for values for a very long time, right? Can you see citizens having control over their personal data and being able to decide more clearly online who could access it, under what terms, how the commercial entities could use that data? Can you see that being a pathway forward which is consistent with European values?
Indeed, I think that we maintain the same philosophy, that it would be first individual person who takes care and who has his or her things and his or her identity under control. And it was amazing experience for me. Sorry, I have long memory. I remember when I came to the Commission in 2014, and suddenly the GDPR landed on my table long before adoption. Yeah, and I was not expert in this field, so I realized suddenly, and maybe thanks to the lack of knowledge, I suddenly had a chance to feel something rather than to think about it. And I felt that the level of unfreedom what the people have in internet era, the unclarity about what's happening in the black box of internet, the lack of possibility to get out of the system freely and to decide on own identity, believe me, it reminded me my times in communist regime. Very similar feeling suddenly, yeah? So that's why I believe that with GDPR, we did the right thing to give the people the individual choice, the consent, and of course it has to be balanced and had to be balanced with the clear obligations for those who are collecting data, monetizing the data, selling the data, and who are gaining control over the individual people. So it's a mixture of things, and I believe that we did the right thing with GDPR.
Yeah, I can see also the challenge of actually having giving people the ability to actually have terms of being able to negotiate back with the data aggregators and having a power which is not just here's what you've got to protect, but actually here's what I can negotiate back with. And I think perhaps another thing with the data aggregators, we tend to talk with the platforms, but there's so many companies that collect data. That issue of being an information fiduciary. Can you see governments moving to the stage, not just in Europe, where they expect companies to use the data in the best interest of the data subject, not just in the best interest of advertisers?
Well, of course, in Europe, I think we are equipped to not to let this happen. That the GDPR is sufficient barrier against prioritizing the interests of business or somebody big's interests rather than the individual people. And let's look again at the obligations those who are collecting data have. Not to give, and I don't want to give a full legal lecture, but just the main elements. Processing of personal data must be lawful, fair, and transparent to the data subject. So the people have to remain subjects. They must not become objects. Yeah, that's the difference. The data must be collected for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes, and not further processed in a manner that is incompatible with those purposes. And this already excludes manipulation. So while this is not a fiduciary duty on all organizations in the sense that some professions have vis-a-vis their clients, these rules put clear limits on what organizations can do with personal data they process. So I think that this is very clear. Anytime I speak to the data protection authorities, I ask how they explain different entities the obligations which we specified in the GDPR, because this is the legislation which is based on the level of potential possible risk. Yeah, so you have to balance it and come with the proportionate measures.
we've just got 1 or 2 more minutes left before the session moves on. But I wanted to just coming back to this issue of disinformation and hate speech. Question of hate speech is always who defines it, who could, and how should they define it, I suppose. Is it possible to agree a European-wide definition of hate speech?
We work with the definitions which are present in all the EU member states' criminal laws. So when we realized we have to quickly do something against hate speech online, which was in 2016, which was a very difficult time for Europe, the combination of big migration wave and terrorism caused a lot of angst in the society. And the online hate speech was very close to spilling over into the real life. That's why we said we have the hate speech defined in all the criminal laws in all the member states, and you platforms look into that and respect it, because what is illegal offline has to be illegal online, or is illegal as well online, and you are closest to clean the space up. It was a surprise for some, because some still in 2016 had a tendency to tell me, we are just the pipes, we have nothing to do with the content. Yeah, but these days were over, and they, of course, there was hanging in the air that we are very close to coming with the legal liability for the content. And if you do not remove, you will be the co-perpetrator. We never went this way, but they had to take more responsibility. So the definitions in the law and in the case law of every single member state, and we speak about 24 languages in the EU. Yeah, so I really wanted them to work with each state, each language, to deploy sufficient capacities and to be cleaning up, because it was really very, very explosive situation. And I felt really obliged to, and I felt the strong duty to protect those who were suddenly the victims of the hate speech, which really was very intense and still is. We have to continue. And now we have this in the Digital Services Act, because it used to be a voluntary action from the platforms, which we wanted. But now we propose the Digital Services Act in December, which will make it a duty to address this issue by removing the hate speech.
Yeah, and we've seen around the world, not just in Europe, but around the world, the use of internet for, say, education and other purposes during COVID, and online bullying, online sexual harassment has become issues that need further addressing. Too many issues, too short amount of time. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for your time. I know you're very busy, and I think it's been a great introduction to this next session. So thank you, Vice President.
Thank you very much, Paul, and many greetings to everywhere, wherever you are. From Brussels. Bye. Thank you.
Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, das Internet bereichert unsere Welt. Nie zuvor in der Geschichte der Menschheit gab es so viel Kommunikation zu so vielen Themen mit so vielen Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmern. Zur Realität gehört allerdings auch, die großartigen Möglichkeiten des Internets werden allzu oft missbraucht. Missbraucht, um Hass und Desinformation zu verbreiten, missbraucht, um zu Gewalt anzustiften. Noch nicht einmal ein halbes Jahr ist vergangen, seit in Washington ein Mob das Kapitol gestürmt hat, angestachelt durch Falschinformation und Hetze im Netz. Und auch in Europa zeigt sich deutlich, dass Hass und Desinformation im Netz schlimme Folgen haben. Engagierte Menschen ziehen sich aus dem demokratischen Diskurs zurück, weil sie sich die Anfeindungen im Netz nicht mehr zumuten wollen. Verschwörungserzählungen verbreiten sich in rasanter Geschwindigkeit, genauso wie antisemitische und rassistische Vorurteile. Und immer wieder werden aus hasserfüllten Worten im Netz hasserfüllte Taten. Brutale Übergriffe bis hin zu Mord. Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, all diese Beobachtungen unterstreichen: Der Kampf gegen Hass und Desinformation im Netz, die Sicherung einer offenen Debattenkultur sind von überragender Bedeutung für unser Gemeinwesen. Den Betreibern der sozialen Netzwerke kommt dabei weltweit besondere Verantwortung zu. Denn sie sind es, die die Foren für den Meinungsaustausch im Netz bereitstellen. Ihre Algorithmen sind es, die bestimmen, welche Inhalte prominent ins Blickfeld der Nutzerinnen und Nutzer gerückt werden. Und sie sind es, die von problematischen Inhalten besonders schnell Kenntnis erlangen können. Dass den sozialen Netzwerken eine besondere Verantwortung zukommt, entlässt die Gesellschaft aber nicht aus der Pflicht. Und vor allem entlässt es den Gesetzgeber nicht aus seiner Verantwortung zu gestalten. Auch in Europa gab es lange Zeit die Vorstellung, der Staat hält sich aus der Regulierung der sozialen Netzwerke am besten heraus. Dieser Ansatz des Laissez-faire ist gescheitert. Und deshalb ist es richtig, dass wir in Europa schon vor einiger Zeit begonnen haben, den sozialen Netzwerken klare Vorgaben zu machen. In Deutschland etwa haben wir das Netzwerkdurchsetzungsgesetz erlassen. Seit 2018 verpflichtet es die großen Netzwerke, schnell auf Nutzerhinweise zu reagieren. Wird ein offensichtlich strafbarer Inhalt gemeldet, muss dieser innerhalb von 24 Stunden gelöscht werden. Und vor kurzem haben wir das Gesetz weiterentwickelt. Künftig gilt, wenn ein soziales Netzwerk von einem besonders schlimmen Hassposting erfährt, dann ist das Löschen allein nicht genug. Die Hassbotschaft muss auch an eine staatliche Stelle gemeldet werden, an das Bundeskriminalamt. Ich spreche hier etwa von Morddrohungen oder Volksverhetzungen. Durch diese Meldepflicht wollen wir erreichen, dass solche schlimmen Hassäußerungen konsequent verfolgt und bestraft werden. Wenn es um die Sicherung der Debattenkultur im Netz geht, dann können wir aber bei nationalen Gesetzen nicht stehen bleiben. In einem geeinten Europa betrifft es uns alle, wenn die Demokratie auch nur in einem Land unter Druck gerät. Wir brauchen deshalb eine zeitgemäße und durchsetzungsstarke gesamteuropäische Plattformregulierung. Und ich begrüße es deshalb, dass die Europäische Kommission Ende letzten Jahres einen Vorschlag für einen Digital Services Act vorgelegt hat. Der Entwurf enthält Vorgaben für eine einheitliche Gestaltung von Meldeverfahren, Verfahren also, mit denen Nutzerinnen und Nutzer illegale Inhalte auf Plattformen melden können. Der Entwurf sieht außerdem vor, dass Plattformen verpflichtet werden, ein internes Beschwerdeverfahren einzurichten. Und darüber hinaus enthält der Entwurf Transparenzpflichten in Bezug auf die Moderation von Inhalten, algorithmische Empfehlungssysteme und Online-Werbung. Aus meiner Sicht gehen diese Vorschläge absolut in die richtige Richtung. Allerdings sehe ich weiteren Handlungsbedarf. Wir müssen sicherstellen, dass die Plattformen ihre Meldeverfahren nutzerfreundlich ausgestalten und es muss klare Fristen geben für die Löschung offensichtlich illegaler Inhalte. Und sicherstellen müssen wir außerdem, dass Plattformen Nutzerinhalte nicht willkürlich löschen. Was in der demokratischen Debatte gesagt werden darf und was nicht, das darf nicht einseitig von Plattformen bestimmt werden. In dieser Hinsicht enthält der Entwurf noch zu wenig Vorgaben. Und wichtig ist zudem, dass die Mitgliedstaaten die Vorschriften des DSA durch weitergehende Regelungen ergänzen können. Denn wenn es um den Schutz von Meinungsfreiheit und Demokratie geht, dann dürfen wir nicht der Logik des kleinsten gemeinsamen Nenners folgen. Dann muss Raum bleiben für wohlüberlegte nationale Schutzvorkehrungen. Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, die Beratungen über den Digital Services Act haben im Januar begonnen und sie sind von herausragender Bedeutung für die Zukunft von Demokratie und Meinungsfreiheit, nicht nur in Europa, auch darüber hinaus. Ich bin überzeugt, eine bessere digitale Welt ist möglich. Um sie zu erreichen, brauchen wir allerdings eine gesamtgesellschaftliche Kraftanstrengung. Wir brauchen die richtigen rechtlichen Rahmenbedingungen. Wir brauchen aber auch eine starke Zivilgesellschaft. Nicht zuletzt deshalb sind globale Veranstaltungen wie die heutige aus meiner Sicht so wertvoll. Denn hier können wir darüber diskutieren, wo unsere politischen Prioritäten liegen. Mein herzlicher Dank an alle, die die heutige Veranstaltung organisiert haben und sich an ihr beteiligen. Ich bin mir sicher, Von der heutigen Diskussion können wichtige Impulse ausgehen für die Debatte über die Zukunft der Netzregulierung. Vielen Dank.
Welcome, everybody, to this session about liberal discourse on the internet and how to protect the values that we all have in common in the digital world. This is a fantastic panel, and I just very quickly going to introduce the panelists. There's Rebecca McKinnon, founding director of Ranking Digital Rights for Freedom of Expression and Privacy. She's also a well-known activist in the field. Welcome, Rebecca. There's Kate O'Regan, director of the Bonavera Institute of Human Rights at Oxford and a former constitutional judge of South Africa. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you.
There's Paul Nemitz. He's a principal advisor for Vera Jourova, which you've just heard, and the Director General for Justice and Consumers. He was also the lead director for the reform of the EU data protection landscape, among many other things. And so he is also one of the exactly right people to talk to. Welcome, Paul.
Hi.
And last but not least, there's Dennis Snower, the man without whom all this wouldn't happen today, the president of the Global Solutions Initiative, and also a deep thinker about internet rights reform. Dennis, welcome to this session. So let me start with Paul, actually. From the European perspective, Paul, there is the Digital Services Act, there is the Digital Markets Act. The EU is extremely busy in the field. There's lots of activity. Where would you say does Europe stand in trying to develop its own model of digital rights and internet reform?
I think we stand in the middle of a process which has started around 4 years ago. We have gone through a phase where there was a lot of talk on self-regulation of big platforms as regards hate speech and xenophobia and ethics for AI. All this has only worked to some extent, not satisfactory. And so the second phase is now that we have a lot of legal proposals on the table. They sound technical, but actually this is very important societal policy. This is not a technical matter. Very important, not only from an economic point of view, but also from the point of view of fundamental rights of individuals and the good functioning of democracy. So I would say we are now writing with the 4 proposals which we have on the table, the rule book, how we will live in the digital world in the future. And it's very important for everybody, and certainly not only for technology people, but also for technology people to engage in the democratic process, which then will lead to binding laws which are enforceable against everyone, including against the big players.
Right, well, thank you so much. Rebecca, as we've just heard, Europe is striving for its unique model and has been doing so for quite some time now. You also observe very closely what's happening both in the US and in China, so the other models. Can you let us in what the latest debates are on both sides of the Pacific?
Right. Well, in the United States, as everyone knows, the U.S. is politically quite divided, and not surprisingly, fairly divided as well when it comes to what to do about the internet, what to do about online speech. And there seems to be some growing consensus, I think, from left and right, that there needs to be some kind of federal privacy law, but exactly what form that will take and how long it will take to pass such a law remains hard to say, just given how distracted the U.S. Congress is on so many different levels. When it comes to speech regulation, you know, on the right, you generally have arguments that that internet platforms should not moderate content at all, and should be held that the law should prevent them from doing so. And on the left, you tend to have arguments that would strengthen the responsibility of platforms to moderate content. A great deal of debate about intermediary liability and whether and how platforms should be held liable for different aspects. There is increasing consensus, I think, in some policy areas that especially given that the U.S. has the First Amendment, which makes it impossible or very, very hard for the government actually to regulate content, to really focus on the business model, to focus on the targeted advertising business model and the algorithmic amplification that drives the spread of extremism and disinformation, and that there needs to be more accountability, more transparency around algorithms, around targeted advertising. There's also, of course, a growing move towards antitrust. But again, what form that will take, there's a great deal of debate. So a lot of debate, quite unclear where things will go in the long run, but a recognition that the status quo is unsatisfactory to everyone, but for different reasons. China, of course, is moving forward with a new draft data privacy law. China presents, I think, a pretty clear model to governments around the world that want to establish control over their internet, sort of the model of internet sovereignty, that the state should have ultimate power to control the internet within its own borders. Of course, that presents challenges for cross-border flows of information and speech in particular. And so then on the U.S. side, of course, you have growing, I think you've heard growing talk from the Biden administration about the need to counter the Chinese authoritarian technology with democratic vision for technology. However, it's not quite clear what that democratic vision is, and whether the United States and Europe can reach sort of consensus about what does it mean to govern and operate technology in support of democracy, particularly when we're in a time of crisis where many of our democracies are seeing liberal values being challenged quite fundamentally, and the rise of identity politics and the desire for regulations that actually just kind of support different identity politics agendas. So it's a real challenge, but I think in the long run, if democratic societies are going to counter, I think, the spread and sort of the appeal to many governments of the authoritarian internet sovereignty model, we need to be able to make a case for why, what sort of a regulatory and technical set of frameworks should look like in support of open societies. What is the positive vision? And I think we're seeing parts of that from Europe, but we also need to make sure that in enacting any regulations, in any kind of technical standards for internet companies' operations, that we are making it possible for civil society, not just in existing democracies, but around the world, to be able to communicate across borders, for Belarusians to be activists, to be able to communicate outside, for whistleblowers and dissidents to use encrypted technologies. And that is the challenge, is how do we set forth the vision of how the internet can work that not only works for our existing democratic societies, but will enable and support civic space around the world to grow.
Thank you so much for this global rundown, if you want. Of course, Kate, being between Cape Town and Oxford, you must have, as we know, a global perspective on these things. And you have done specifically a lot of work on hate speech. Maybe this being taken as a very important example. Where does the evolution stand, and especially where does the international cooperation, the process of international cooperation stand?
Well, regulating hate speech is one of the most intractable problems for international human rights law, because international human rights law recognizes, on the one hand, freedom of speech, but it also recognizes a duty to remove speech that can be harmful. And of course, what we consider to be hate speech in any particular society varies enormously. And that variation is partly a matter of political culture, political philosophy, also circumstance. And so in terms of trying to think about how to create a global mechanism for the regulation of hate speech, we're challenged by these two competing sets of values, which will have to be applied in every case in which hate speech is raised. So hate speech is a particularly tricky problem for establishing a global solution to internet speech.
Dennis, we've looked at the different parts of the world, and we started with Europe. I'm going to ask you about Europe. Is there a consensus emerging as to how Europe is going to proceed, how it's going to assure where the control over data is going to lie, and how its sort of unique selling point of a model is going to evolve?
I think in terms of where Europe will be going, Paul is the expert here, but in terms of where I believe the debate should be going, we have developed a number of ideas in a large international team. And basically, I think many problems that we currently have in the digital space can be addressed by giving users much more access and control over the data about themselves. So if, for example, users had complete control over first-party private data like selfies and could give that to others on terms that they themselves determine, or in particular their representatives determine, and if second-party private data would be governed by the same type of regulations as doctor-patient relationships or lawyer-client relationships, solely in the interests of the data subjects, then we would be in a different world. In addition, of course, one would need data commons where people can share data for a specific purpose, and there would be a fiduciary duty on the part of the people organizing the data commons to make sure that the data is only used for that purpose, maybe even technologically impossible to use it for others. And then lastly, official data, which is data like your name, your passport number, your belongings, and so on, that should have official authentication. It's just like in Germany, when you come into a hotel, they ask you for your passport, and to say I can remember my passport number and my name is not sufficient. They actually need to see the official authentication. That too is possible on the internet, and it would prevent multiple identities. And what it would do is it would make hate speech much more difficult, because people would have single identities that could be pinpointed by authentication. And in addition to changing, obviously, the model in terms of power asymmetries, because the representatives of users could then negotiate on much more level playing field with the digital service providers. You'd also have a huge economic revival, because currently I believe we give a lot of information about ourselves away for free, often without informed consent. And in addition, we get apps for free, and more of our market economy is turning into barter, and barter is totally inefficient. And so a country or a set of countries, a region that enables users to get more control over their data will attract, I think, economic activity, much like economic activity was attracted to Great Britain in the early Industrial Revolution when they created labor markets instead of indentured servitude and feudal arrangements. So I think there's a lot to be said for giving users control.
Paul, basically Dennis is calling for Europe to go all the way in terms of privacy and data protection, and kind of develop an online world that's very much in line with the physical world that we are used to. Is that where Europe can and should be going? And also, would this be a concept that can be sold, for example, to America and to the Biden administration, given that the internet platforms from California are going to have some problems with it?
Well, first of all, the internet platforms from California make huge money, in particular when they sign up 150% to data protection as we like it in Europe. So I think, the fact that Apple is extremely aggressive on privacy, the fact that Microsoft has said that it grants all customers worldwide, not just in Europe, worldwide, GDPR rights, shows us that exactly the opposite of what your question insinuated is true. Namely, those who sign up positively, constructively, and I would say aggressively, to protecting individuals' privacy make the most of money. Because, Apple and Microsoft are the top two companies at the stock exchange. They are the highest capitalized companies in this world. So I would say the thesis which you put into the room, namely that we are regulating against the market, is wrong. The market shows that people want privacy, but they're being screwed by many. And if you ask me about the Biden administration, I'm very, very confident that the Biden administration, if you look at the people they are recruiting into the White House, into the FTC, will be extremely constructive and inspired by what we're doing in Europe, not only on data protection, but also the other elements of regulating the digital space. Let me also recall, and I was the chief negotiator at the time, I was also the Snowden investigator of the Commission, that when we worked on the Privacy Shield with the US and when we worked on GDPR in Europe, President Obama already tried twice to get a federal privacy law in place. It was called the Privacy Baseline Act. He failed twice because he couldn't pass in Congress. But I would say the willingness compared to the time then has increased enormously. And let me close by saying, if you look at the empirics of what people want, Americans are like Europeans. And that's not our EU Commission empirics, that's American empirics. People are fed up with what Al Gore already called ages ago the stalker economy.
All right. I'm sure there was a reason why you didn't mention Google and Facebook, but let's leave it at that and ask Rebecca. Rebecca, how do you view this from the other side of the Atlantic? Is what has been depicted here, is that a model that you think everybody can unite on?
Yeah, I think Paul's right. The Biden administration is quite eager to move forward on a lot of fronts. It's I think increasingly a national security imperative, among other things, that the U.S. pass a strong privacy law. And the problem is that Biden has perhaps 2 years with a majority in both houses of Congress to get a lot of things passed. And after 2 years, it's possible, many believe quite likely that he will, that the Democrats could lose the majority in the House, which will then bring Biden more to the position that Obama was in. So time is short. There's a lot of things that have to get passed. I'm afraid that privacy law and sort of internet-related regulation are not as high priority as a number of economic infrastructure bills and other things that are. He's still having difficulty passing, even though there's a majority. So there's a lot of. There remain many political challenges, but hopefully through the executive branch, the Biden administration will be able to move enough things forward. I do think that there is among public opinion generally a desire for greater privacy protection. That's very true. I also think that increasingly, even among companies that are not Apple and Microsoft, you're starting to see a desire for regulation just so that there's a level playing field, that actually the uncertainty about what the law might be in the future, or the fact that there isn't a law, gives them more, creates more commercial pressure to be exploitative with data. And actually you're even seeing Facebook saying that they would like more legal requirements to create more certainty in the market. And investors are also starting to push for that. So the market, I agree with Paul, does want a regulation of some form. The question is, can the American political system deliver on that? And that is the big challenge.
Kate, may I ask you for your take on this question of a united Western world in this question, but also with a certain twist, and that is that protection of privacy and freedom of expression are not always the same thing. They sometimes go at odds with each other. So are we overdoing one with no regard for the other?
Yes.
Well, I don't. Oh, I'm sorry.
That was Kate's question.
Yes. So I'd like to start by noting that it's very interesting that the large social media platforms, and in particular Facebook, have adopted in relation to their hate speech regulation, their content regulation, something that looks very European. This is a company that is not bound by the First Amendment. It's this strange anomaly in the United States that it's government that's got an obligation to protect free speech, and private organizations can more or less do as they wish. But in seeking to protect free speech, what the Facebook community standards look very like the European community standards. So that would support in a kind of a way your question, that there is a model coming out of Europe that may well have a wider appeal than perhaps we would immediately think. And I think that's the same with GDPR. So through a range of techniques within GDPR, of course, Europe is seeking to ensure that its major trading partners and even some of its smaller trading partners in other parts of the world comply with GDPR, giving them kind of favored status in relation to trading. And although that's somewhat off to a slow start, I think you're seeing there is an appetite for protection in large parts of the world. A counter note is that I do think that consent, which is one of the key underpinnings of Dennis Snow's approach to this, is quite weak. I mean, any of us who spend any time on the internet know how exasperating it is to be asked to decide what cookies you will allow or won't allow. When you're in a good citizen mode, you go laboriously in and you determine what you will and won't allow. And when you're in a great rush, you think, oh, can't be bothered, I'll just say yes. And I think it is one of the weaknesses of the kind of consent-based model, is that they are laborious. And I'm not sure exactly what the details are, Dennis, of your proposal, but I think you would find that there's not necessarily the appetite for individual autonomy over these things as much as we would like. And yet, I think there may well be a regulatory interest in ensuring actually that not all of this data is simply shared, just as we feel under GDPR in relation to states. There's some data that we should be regulated into protection and not just based on consent.
Dennis, the floor is obviously yours.
I think you could not put your finger closer to the center of the target when you say there's not informed consent. And avoiding informed consent is easier, I think, than it sounds, because I believe that the online world should imitate the offline world. We've had hundreds of years of experience in how to give people informed consent. So, when slaves got their freedom in the States, things were difficult initially because there were huge power asymmetries. In early industrial England, workers didn't have rights. But once you give users control over the data about themselves, they can be given meaningful rights of association and thereby have representatives who then can think much more carefully about the intricacies of informed consent, and they can decide which representatives represent them. And just as we have enormous numbers of social groups in the offline world, we have that in the digital world as well, except that the platforms are all prefabricated for us. We're all stuck into this Procrustean bed, and all the data belongs to the digital monopolists. So if users got control and they were given rights of association, which they would clearly use, and the rights of vulnerable people would be protected as in the offline world, and then you could have GAAP type oversight of data traffickers. Then you would be in a different world. And that online world would then resemble the offline world to a much greater degree. Still far from perfect, but at least we're taking advantage of all these centuries of experience we've had in building democracies. It shouldn't go to waste in the digital space, I believe.
Paul, you've written a book on the subject, so I'm wondering about your take on this specific issue.
Yeah, I agree with Dennis. I think it is part of the duty of policy to organize counterpower and the very many different forms of counterpower, which are the signs of a free society. And let me give you some examples how this is already happening. First, we have Rebecca in the room who does a great ranking of companies. I'm sure that has an impact on the market, ranking of companies by privacy, respect, and so on. That's good. We have None of Your Business, NOYB, an NGO I co-founded, but the big founder and big figurehead is, of course, Max Schrems from Vienna, very successfully doing exactly what Dennis Nauer says. Everybody can join this movement. It has become quite big. I think there are now 20 employees in Vienna. There are many, many people who put their money into the strategic litigation which Max Schrems brings forward to realize our privacy. The European Union has made it possible that collective action can be taken before courts in the member states which foresee the laws for this. So this is a matter which has been delegated to member states. Some member states have done it, like Germany, some others haven't. So there's a lot happening and I would also point to the proposal of the Commission of one of the packages of legislative proposals which we have on the table is what is called the Data Governance Act. Not discussed enough, because the Data Governance Act foresees a framework for the creation of independent data intermediaries, which would act, and now I move a little bit outside my legal expertise, but back sort of into the field of economists, like banks, like banks which take your money and are supposed to manage it in your interest, but at the same time use this money to feed it into society as investment and credit for companies to be able to innovate. And the idea for the data intermediaries is exactly this. They should collect your data, manage it for you, manage your consent in a way which you instruct them, but to your benefit, and at the same time bring the data together, aggregate it, and make it then available, hopefully in an anonymized form, if that's possible, for the economy, for AI development in the public interest and in business interest. So I would say this is the great challenge before us, to recreate a world in which we have power and counterpower, checks and balances, not only a functioning market, but also all the other structures which signify a free society. And maybe in the future, we will see that the parallel to unions in the labor market, will be data intermediaries, or what some people have called data trustees or indeed data unions. So much is possible. And what is key here is to, and this is what I wrote in my book, to get those who know technology and who work on the internet, who work on AI, who work on the data platform, business models and technology models, to re-engage with democracy. My feeling is many in the technology scene have turned away from democracy. You know, this is a talking shop, you know, only a problem for innovation. And too many people still talk down democracy in such a way, in the classic neoliberal way. Let's stop doing it and let's engage in democracy to make it work.
All right. Now, there seems to be some sort of a transatlantic consensus emerging, I hope. 10 seconds each. What's the major hurdle? What's the major obstacle within the next couple of years for this to happen? Rebecca goes first.
I think focus and politics, both domestic politics in the US and I think domestic politics in Europe may get pretty challenging in the next few years as well.
All right, Kate.
Yes, I'd agree with Rebecca. The domestic politics is difficult, but it's also important, I think, to recognize that one needs to take the rest of the world along. This should not just be another exercise in the global north. We need to get on board the democracies in the global south.
All right, Dennis.
I think it will be hard to get people in the north, south, east, or west to disagree with the proposition that users should have control over the data about themselves. But I do believe that moving in the direction will adversely affect, possibly, or at least temporarily, the business model of the big data service providers. And they obviously have huge lobbying power, and that is going to be one obstacle that governments have lots of experience in overcoming.
All right, thank you too, Dennis, and thank you for such a concise panel, hopeful panel. There are hurdles, but they can be overcome. We're out of data, out of time. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.